Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Donald Trump's presidency is just 24 days old, and already a key member of his team has been forced to resign. Michael Flynn quit overnight after it emerged that he'd misled the administration about the extent of his conversations with Russia's ambassador in Washington. But as our North America editor John Sopel reports, the resignation is unlikely to close down the controversy.
They were oh so close, politically inseparable. But after just 3 weeks as National Security Advisor, Michael Flynn has gone in a stunning fall from grace after a day of chaos and confusion at the White House. The camera-loving president suddenly becoming camera-shy when asked about his future.
Do you have full confidence in him?
Today, the Republican leadership welcomed his departure.
You cannot have a national security advisor misleading the vice president and others. So I think the president was right to ask for his resignation, and I believe it was the right thing to do.
This all goes back to action taken over the Christmas period by the former President Barack Obama to impose sanctions against Russia over its interference in the US election. On the 29th of December, Michael Flynn speaks to the Russian ambassador in the first of a series of calls. On the 15th of January, Vice President Mike Pence denies that sanctions were discussed.
What I can confirm, having spoken to him about it, is that those conversations that happened to occur around the time that the United States took action to expel diplomats had nothing whatsoever to do with those sanctions.
But in late January, the former acting Attorney General warned the White House it might have been misled by General Flynn's account. No action was taken. But then on the 9th of February, the Washington Post revealed that Flynn did discuss sanctions, and it was then that pressure grew. Today, the White House was trying to draw a line under the affair.
In the end, it was misleading the vice president that made the situation unsustainable.
Which the White House knew about last month. And yet yesterday you went on the air and said that General Flynn had the complete and full confidence of the president.
And General Flynn decided that he should resign last night, and the president accepted that resignation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage General Mike Flynn, retired United States Army.
Michael Flynn was a spear carrier for Donald Trump during the election, making Hillary Clinton's honesty a central point of attack.
We do not need a reckless president who believes she is above the law. Lock her up. That's right. That's right. Lock her up.
But now it is Michael Flynn who, on a question of trust, has been found wanting and finds himself very much alone. John Sopel, BBC News, Washington.
And John's in Washington for us. Now, John, in your report, you just said that the White House is trying to draw a line under this whole affair. Well, will they manage that?
I doubt it, George. I think they're trying to isolate it and say it was purely a question that Mike Flynn had misled the vice president. But actually, that's not quite it. What happened was that the problem started when it got made public. It's not the misleading, it's the misleading coming into the public domain. And there are a whole series of kind of smaller questions like who knew what, when and where, what did the president know about the calls that took place to the ambassador, what happened to the advice that the acting attorney general gave to the White House counsel. Those will sort of fade away, I suspect, in time. There is a much bigger question than all of this, and it all centres on what is the Trump relationship with Putin's Russia. If you think of all the people that Donald Trump has insulted on Twitter freely, the one person he won't have a word said against is Vladimir Putin. And that question is a big one and is here to stay.
John, thank you.
Moving on now, and President Trump is embroiled in another political storm tonight after a key aide quit less than a month into the job. Michael Flynn resigned as National Security Advisor after it emerged that he had discussed lifting sanctions with the Russian ambassador before taking office. And it's left Mr. Trump facing more damaging questions. Here's our Washington correspondent, Robert Moore.
Good morning. Breaking overnight, Michael Flynn resigns as
If the Trump presidency was in turmoil already, it has now been plunged into perilous territory. General Flynn, a key Trump loyalist, is out after less than a month. The man who gave this warning to Iran
As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
has now been given notice himself and ejected from the White House. Flynn appeared to have curiously close links to the Kremlin, even sitting next to President Putin at this dinner in 2015. What sealed his fate was a phone call he made to the Russian ambassador even before Trump took office. He told the vice president he had not discussed sanctions, but he had, meaning Mike Pence misled the nation with this comment.
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions.
There is now a sense of crisis swirling around the White House, with many Republicans in extreme discomfort and Democrats pouncing.
Flynn was secretly communicating with Russian officials at the same time that Russia was attacking our democracy.
Hello, everybody. The bigger question is whether the president instructed Flynn to discuss lifting sanctions with the Russians. Trump was today meeting teachers, making no comment to reporters, but he issued this tweet. The real story here is, why are there so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington? Will these leaks be happening as I deal on North Korea, etc.? On Friday aboard Air Force One, he had denied any knowledge of Flynn's conversation with the Russians, even though the acting Attorney General had raised the alarm.
I don't know about it. I haven't seen it. What report is that?
I, Stephen Mnuchin, do solemnly swear.
Last night, Mike Pence and Donald Trump were in the Oval Office swearing in the new Treasury Secretary. But pressure is quickly growing for a full congressional inquiry on the mysterious links between the administration and the Kremlin. Now, one of the most celebrated and damaging questions in Washington is being asked, with its echoes of Watergate. What did the president know, and when did he know it? Well, the administration right now under enormous pressure. Just a few minutes ago, the White House spokesman saying that Donald Trump had simply lost all confidence and trust in Mike Flynn. Some Republicans in the Senate are now saying that there needs to be a congressional investigation. Democrats are asking the damaging question of whether Trump is hiding his own secret links to Russia. And even some intelligence professionals in this town are asking the extraordinary question of whether the West Wing has actually been penetrated by the Russian security services.
Robert Moore in Washington, thank you.
He was one of the key first appointments to the Trump administration, but now the president's national security advisor, Mike Flynn, has had to resign over telephone conversations he held with the Russian ambassador before he was appointed to office. He's admitted that he inadvertently failed to give the full details of the conversations when asked about them by Vice President Mike Pence. But the affair has prompted questions of when Donald Trump knew about the calls and their content. Kylie Morris is in Washington. Kylie.
John, we're just hearing from the White House briefing now that this is, they say, about an erosion of trust because Mike Flynn lied to the vice president. That meant President Trump lost confidence in him. I think they're working hard to massage this story away from any suggestion that anyone broke the law in their handling of this, and certainly to try and kind of eliminate, at least take Russia out of the picture. But there are many questions hanging in the air here today. First, though, let's look at the rapid rise and fall of General Mike Flynn.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Only 2 weeks ago, the president's maverick national security advisor stepped up to the podium with an alarming message for Tehran.
As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
But in truth, he was already on notice himself. He'd been caught lying about phone calls to the Russian ambassador that at best undermined American policy and at worst broke the law. It was back in December when the US expelled a bunch of Russian diplomats, many of them worked here in the embassy in Washington, in retaliation for Moscow interfering in the presidential election. Now, on that very same day, Mike Flynn got on the phone to his mate, the Russian ambassador. And it's what he said on that day in those phone calls that has ultimately forced his resignation. Had he promised lifting sanctions on Russia when his boss Donald Trump took office? No, it was more Christmas greetings and organising meetings, said the White House, and the Vice President backed them up.
Did Mike Flynn ever discuss lifting sanctions in any of those conversations?
I talked to General Flynn yesterday, and the conversations that took place at that time were not in any way related to new U.S. sanctions.
Perhaps everyone just wanted to believe Mike Flynn. After all, this was Trump's loyal lieutenant. Yes, he'd had dinner with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and had been fired from his last job for insubordination. But at campaign events like the one where we tried to talk to him...
Can we ask you briefly about Russia?
He was front and centre, a powerful ally for a candidate with no experience.
Yes, that's right. Lock her up.
The new president rewarded him by making Mike Flynn his most senior national security advisor. But this is Washington, and anyone who's read a spy novel knows that American intelligence listens to Russian phone calls. Certainly Mike Flynn should have known that the FBI would be listening. They were. What they heard went straight across the road to the Department of Justice. Late last month, the department, with the FBI's blessing, informed the White House counsel because of concerns Flynn was lying and might have left himself open to blackmail. When that story broke on Friday, the president was quizzed at close quarters on board Air Force One.
Ambassador to Russia, before you were inaugurated, about sanctions, maybe trying to...
I haven't seen that. I'll look at that.
Even late yesterday, the White House professed full confidence in the general.
Yes, General Flynn does enjoy the full confidence of the president.
But in a matter of hours, that full confidence fizzled away.
The key here is the misleading of the vice president and others, the incomplete information or the inability to completely recall what did or did not happen.
The White House now admits it's known about this for weeks and that senior staff have apparently been angsting over what to do. The thing is, last night they lost their deniability when it came out that the Department of Justice had told them everything. That raised questions. Why were they covering for Mike Flynn? Who else might have been involved? And suddenly, Mike Flynn was history. The president today took to Twitter to try to reset the story, which was really, he wrote about why there are so many illegal leaks coming out of Washington. In the corridors of Congress, senior Republicans saw the story a little differently.
The whole environment is one of dysfunction in the Trump administration as far as national security is concerned.
Michael Flynn resigns.
The president has always promised to make America safe again, but barely a month in power and he's lost trust in the man he trusted to make his most senior national security advisor. General Flynn's departure adds to a sense of chaos undermining the new administration. And even as the White House insists that there was no illegality here, that's what they want people to remember, make no mistake, this is a major setback for President Trump. It's a bad dream. His most trusted advisor, a maverick who was very popular with voters, who represented exactly the kind of new provocative direction that the president wanted to take. But this isn't only about personalities, this is about the Trump administration's relationship to Russia, something the White House really doesn't want back on the agenda. Remember the dossier? Having navigated around that, again, the White House is having to deny the president asked Mike Flynn to make these calls and defend failing to act on this for weeks. Here's what the White House spokesman has just said.
The issue here was that the president got to the point where General Flynn's relationship, misleading the vice president and others, or the possibility that he had forgotten critical details of this important conversation, had created a critical mass and an unsustainable situation. That's why the president decided to ask for his resignation, and he got it.
And who comes next? Well, brace yourself among the potential successors. General Petraeus, who the president would have to pardon for leaking state secrets to his mistress before he could be appointed.
Kylie Morris in Washington. Well, with us in the studio here now is Karen von Hippel, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the US State Department, now Director of the foreign policy think tank, the Royal United Services Institute. We're joined from Washington by John Cipher, a former intelligence officer who ran the CIA's Russia program for 3 years, and from Connecticut by the former Navy SEAL Carl Higbie, who is a Trump supporter. Karen von Hippel, if I could start with you. You've been in government. You've had to intersect both with the State Department and probably in dealings with the White House. What is the picture you have of the White House tonight?
Yeah, I mean, it really seems like a house in disarray. Trump, as far as we can tell, and Carl can correct me if he disagrees, but Trump is really used to managing a private company, and running a government is a very different thing. There are issues of morale, you need leadership, you need teamwork, and we're not really seeing any of that right now.
But there seems to be no leadership within the White House below Trump.
Right. So Flynn was a national security advisor, and he's supposed to coordinate the national security team. But even inside the White House, it appears people were finding out what was happening from the news, not even from inside the White House. He doesn't have enough people in yet. And, you know, that's really another challenge, that he's just not been appointing people as quickly. I think the transition team wasn't as prepared as it should have been. And some of this has to do with Trump himself saying, well, I can make all these decisions. You know, I rely on my own judgment.
Well, Carl Higbie, what's your reaction to what's happened today? I mean, you are a Trump supporter, but you also know about intelligence.
Well, yes, and I think you guys made a good point that there is a clear rift and division within the White House itself between holdovers from Obama that are filling positions that will soon be appointed by President Trump, but also the fact that you have loyalists, people who believe in Trump's message, and then people who believe in conventional party politics. And they're both in the cabinet right now, and it's tearing the cabinet apart publicly and giving way to things like this. And I think what needs to happen is, you're right, Trump needs to get his people in place now that believe in his message, that can help execute it faithfully and quickly.
But surely what we learned tonight is that the White House have known for up to 3 weeks that this has been going on, that this whole question of the integrity of the National Security Advisor has been at stake. And it seems that Mr. Trump did nothing about it. I mean, should he have?
Well, you know, I'll let that decision lie in there. I know Mike Flynn. He's always been an honorable, trustworthy, straight shooter to me. I can say what happened here is tragic. I mean, it's not good for the administration. It's not good for the public perception of it. But I will say that this is Trump's chance to get things in order, get the people out. I mean, who are standing in the way of his agenda right now, and start working towards making America better.
John Cipher, you also, I think, have had dealings with Mike Flynn. I mean, what do you make of his fall from grace?
Well, I see this a little bit differently in terms of putting his people in. I think, you know, we don't have a Republican foreign policy or a Democrat foreign policy. We're meant to, with foreign policy, once we get off the water's edge, we're meant to have sort of a bipartisan foreign policy. And I think Mr. Flynn's sort of disdain for the previous administration got him into hot water by his willingness to sort of collude with a foreign power, Russia, while another president and another administration was in power. And that's the problem here, I think.
Well, now, on the question of Russia, where do we go from here? Because one suspects that Mr. Putin may even feel himself somewhat queasy about all this.
Well, my issue here is the Trump administration has not made it clear what is U.S. interest in engaging with Russia. We've heard months and months of how we want to have good relations with Mr. Putin, and there's been all the dossier, Mr. Steele's dossier, there's been Mr. Flynn's reaching out to the Russian ambassador, but it's never been clear to us exactly why. Those of us who have been in foreign policy see a lot of reasons why Mr. Putin would want sanctions relief, and he would want more of a firm hand in Eastern Europe and all those type of things. But the Trump administration has never made it clear what is in the U.S. interest in terms of dealing with Russia.
If we're honest about this, Karen von Hippel, the Western world is without leadership.
Yeah. I mean, the concern I've had for his presidency since the start is he's very erratic and inconsistent. And we've seen just chaos, really, in the few weeks since he's been in power. People on the streets, decisions overturned, changing his mind on a number of really big issues, whether it's China, whether it's Russia, whether it's even Israel settlements. And, you know, I worry about America not being the predictable, stable beacon in the world where people know what U.S. foreign policy is. I think that only leads to chaos out there.
Well, now, Carl Higbie, you worked on Russia for the CIA. You were in the lead on this this matter. I'm sorry, I should actually have been turning to you, Mr. Cipher. You led on relations with Russia. Now, what do you think they will be making of this? I mean, and what should we be guarding against here in Europe?
Well, clearly there's a lot of stories about how the Putin administration is really pleased with the comments by Mr. Trump, and we certainly can understand that, and I'm sure they're hoping for a new relationship with the United States. However, they also are probably going through a lot of the same things that we are, is trying to decipher his tweets and his comments, because they are very scattered across, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of competence, at least not yet, in his team. So they're probably trying to figure this out as well. I think now with the resignation of Mr. Flynn, the Russians are probably quite worried that any fast effort to improve relations with Russia is going to be very difficult. This gives power to both the Democrats, who are going to want to continue to investigate this with good reason, and Republicans who've been on the Hill for a long time and have no interest in cozying up to Russia. So this is going to make, if Mr. Trump had a desire to move fast and improve relations with Russia, I suspect this slows it down.
Carl Higbie, this has been a pretty disastrous 3 weeks for the president. I mean, is this the Trump you were supporting? I mean, is this exactly what you wanted?
Well, the Trump that I'm supporting is not being perpetuated by this, by some of the people that he's dealing with in the administration. I think the American media also has done a real disservice to the potential relationship with Russia, in the sense that they've essentially demonized any type of contact, any type of working with them or trying to get along with them as negative. And I remember President Obama, during the Mitt Romney election, was praised for saying that Mitt Romney, the Cold War called, they want their policy back. And when he wanted to do the Russian reset and things like that. So I think the mainstream media here in America has really done a disservice to any potential relationship with Russia. And it's not conducive to success.
Well, Mr. Higbie, can I just interrupt you right there? Because, I mean, if it weren't for the Washington Post, we probably wouldn't know 3/3 of this.
Well, the issue here is there are substantial leaks within the administration right now, and that comes from the holdovers from Obama. A lot of people who don't agree with Trump's policies. I believe in Trump. I know him. I've met him. I know his family. He is trying to do this for America. He didn't have to do this. He's a billionaire, could have retired on a beach, but he did this because he loves the United States.
Let me just put those points to Karen von Hippel. You were shaking your head.
Well, I disagree about the holdovers from Obama. Almost everyone I know who worked for Obama was told unceremoniously to get out the door. Some people were even on airplane trips going to different countries for work when they were told to pack up their bags. So it's really an issue of, you have some people that many of us are concerned about, like Steve Bannon, Michael Flynn is another one, who are pitted against some pretty seasoned, able cabinet members, and that's really the concern. Is you have very extremes in that White House right now.
Karen von Hippel, thank you very much. And John Cipher in Washington, thank you very much. And in Connecticut, thank you very much, Carl Higbie. Matt.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Now, the government has rejected a petition calling for Donald Trump's state visit here. His invitation to be withdrawn. Nearly 2 million people signed it, but ministers say that although they recognize the strong views expressed, they are looking forward to welcoming the president. A counter-petition also attracted more than 300,000 signatures. Both will be debated by the House of Commons later this month.
Well, now, back to Washington. And while we've been on air, the U.S. Office of Government Ethics has asked the White House to investigate comments made by the president's counselor, Kellyanne Conway, apparently promoting the business interests of Ivanka Trump.
I've been getting away with it all